There is a habit that millions of people repeat every single day without questioning it, without analyzing it, without stopping for a single second to ask whether what they're doing is actually working, or whether it's simply postponing a problem that keeps growing beneath the surface. Coffee. It's on the table in the morning before anything else. It's in the middle of the afternoon when energy drops and the task still isn't finished. It's before an important meeting, before a conversation that requires presence, before any moment that demands the brain to function well. For many people, for most people who reach their 50s, 60s, 70s with a caffeine routine established over decades, coffee has become the only known way to try to keep the mind alert, the only lever available, the only mechanism of control over a system that seems to be progressively slipping out of control. But there is something almost nobody admits out loud. It isn't just a lack of energy. A lack of energy would be simple. A lack of energy has an obvious solution. Sleep more, rest better, slow down when necessary. A lack of energy is tolerable because it's understandable, because it has a narrative that makes sense, because it threatens nothing beyond physical comfort. What's actually happening is different. It's the growing feeling of mental confusion that appears in moments that shouldn't be confusing. The frequent forgetting of things you know, names, words, where you put something, what you were doing 2 minutes ago. The difficulty concentrating that settles in even when external conditions are ideal, even when there's no noise, even when you've rested. That specific feeling of starting something, a sentence, a task, a line of reasoning, and not being able to finish it with the clarity that used to be automatic, of losing the thread in the middle, of reaching the end of a paragraph and realizing you didn't absorb what you read, of being in a conversation and noticing half a second late that your mind went somewhere else without warning. And gradually, this collection of experiences awakens something that goes far beyond daily inconvenience. It awakens a silent fear. Am I losing control of my mind without realizing it? That question, formulated in words or not, conscious or not, is what's underneath the third, the fourth, the fifth cup of coffee of the day. It isn't just a search for energy. It's an attempt to maintain control over something that feels like it's slowly slipping away. And coffee isn't solving that, because coffee was never designed to solve that. It was exactly at this point, the moment when it becomes clear that artificial stimulation isn't a solution for a problem with real, specific causes, that something simple began drawing attention from researchers and from people seeking a different approach. Not a radical replacement of coffee, not a dramatic habit change that few people can sustain for more than 2 weeks, not a complex protocol requiring specialized supervision and an elaborate shopping list. An addition, a single ingredient, small, accessible, available at any grocery store for a few cents, that most people have at home but use only occasionally in seasonal recipes. 1 clove, added to coffee, to the same coffee that's already part of the routine, at the same moment that's already familiar, without requiring any structural change in anyone's life. And the natural question is, how can something this simple make a real difference? The answer lies in the compounds cloves contain and the specific way they interact with the processes the brain needs to function well. It was exactly from the bioactive compounds identified in cloves that researchers developed a new understanding of how to support brain health through small strategic additions to the daily routine. You'll find it at the first link in the description. Cloves are one of the spices with the highest density of bioactive compounds per gram available in the human diet. That statement isn't marketing exaggeration, it's measurable. On scales that compare the antioxidant capacity of different foods, cloves consistently appear among the most concentrated available, surpassing fruits widely known for their antioxidant properties and even other functional foods frequently studied. And the compound most relevant to brain health is eugenol. Eugenol is the main volatile component of cloves, the one that gives cloves their characteristic aroma and flavor, and also the one with the most extensively studied pharmacological profile. The first relevant mechanism is the direct antioxidant effect on neural tissue. The brain is the organ with the highest oxygen consumption in the body, approximately 20% of all the oxygen you breathe, despite representing less than 2% of body weight. That intense metabolism continuously generates byproducts called free radicals. Under normal conditions, the body neutralizes these radicals with natural antioxidant systems. But when free radical production exceeds the ability to neutralize them, which happens with increasing ease with aging, inadequate diet, and chronic stress, the result is oxidative stress. And neurons under chronic oxidative stress function progressively less efficiently. Synapses become less precise, processing speed decreases, memory becomes less reliable. Eugenol is a potent antioxidant with the ability to neutralize specific free radicals that cause lipid oxidative damage, the type of damage particularly problematic for neural membranes, which are composed predominantly of fat. The second mechanism is the anti-inflammatory effect. Low-grade chronic inflammation, that silent state of immune alert that inadequate diet, sedentary living, and stress sustain over time, is one of the factors most consistently associated with cognitive decline in the most recent research. Eugenol has demonstrated in studies the ability to inhibit cyclooxygenase, the enzyme that participates in the production of inflammatory prostaglandins, through a mechanism similar to pharmaceutical anti-inflammatories, but with a very different safety profile when consumed in the amounts present in food. The microglia, the brain's immune cells, when exposed to anti-inflammatory compounds like eugenol in a state of active neuroinflammation, demonstrated lower pro-inflammatory activity in research models. This means less interference with neural communication, less compromise of synapses, and less contribution to progressive cognitive decline. The third mechanism is the effect on circulation. The brain depends absolutely on a constant, efficient, abundant blood flow. Any factor that reduces that flow directly impacts neural function. Eugenol has demonstrated mild vasodilatory and anticoagulant properties that may contribute to improved microvascular flow, the flow in the small vessels that directly irrigate brain tissue. The fourth mechanism is glycemic regulation. The brain is the most glucose-dependent organ in the body, but it doesn't function well with glycemic instability. With the sharp spikes and drops in blood sugar that characterize the modern diet, cloves have demonstrated in multiple studies the ability to improve insulin sensitivity and modulate the glycemic response after meals. When consumed with coffee, which by itself can produce cortisol spikes that interfere with glycemic regulation, cloves can contribute to a more stable glycemic curve, which translates into a more constant energy supply for the brain and fewer oscillations in focus and clarity throughout the day. And the fifth element is the other bioactive compounds present in cloves, flavonoids, tannins, terpenoids, that contribute synergistically to the effects we've described, while also exerting antimicrobial and neuroprotective properties that more recent studies continue to investigate. But here is the crucial point that differentiates this approach from simply taking another supplement. The clove isn't replacing coffee, it's transforming what coffee already is. A daily ritual, a moment of pause, a practice already deeply integrated into the routine, into a vehicle for compounds that the brain needs and that most people are not providing adequately. It's the difference between trying to add a completely new habit to life, something most people can't sustain for more than a few weeks, and optimizing a habit that already exists. That already has an established time, an associated ritual, an intrinsic motivation that doesn't need to be cultivated from scratch. One clove added to the coffee preparation, placed directly in the filter with the grounds or left to infuse for a few minutes in hot water before mixing, extracts the bioactive compounds efficiently. The heat of the preparation process facilitates the release of eugenol and the other active components. No exaggeration. No expectations of overnight transformation. No idea that a single ingredient is going to fix decades of inadequate habits on its own. But with the clear understanding that small strategic additions, maintained with consistency over time, create a progressively different internal environment. And that progressively different internal environment manifests as progressively better cognitive function. If you want to start this process today, what researchers have isolated about how to implement this adjustment practically and combine it with the other factors that actually matter is available at the first link in the description. As simple as it always should have been. But there is an emotional dimension of this story that needs to be told honestly. Because cognitive decline, even the subtle kind, even when it's still in the early stages where everything can be rationalized and justified, isn't just a cognitive issue, it's an identity issue. When the mind starts failing with increasing frequency, confidence goes with it. Not all at once, not dramatically, but in small erosions that accumulate in ways that are difficult to name and even harder to reverse without understanding what's underneath. Forgetting something simple becomes a source of internal tension that lasts for hours. Losing the thread of reasoning in the middle of a conversation generates an embarrassment you carry long after the conversation ended. Repeating a question, realizing you already asked that, seeing in the other person's eyes the recognition of that fact, causes a shame that is deposited, layer by layer, over the image you have of yourself. And then the vigilance begins. Am I going to forget again? Are they noticing? Am I getting worse faster than I think? This constant self-monitoring, this perpetual surveillance of every cognitive function generates anxiety, and anxiety elevates cortisol. And chronically elevated cortisol is directly toxic to the hippocampus, the brain region most critical for forming new memories. And memory gets worse, which increases anxiety, which increases cortisol, which worsens memory further. It's a silent cycle, invisible to those inside it, and extraordinarily efficient at keeping people trapped exactly where they don't want to be. Breaking that cycle doesn't begin with willpower. It doesn't begin with the decision to stop worrying, as if that were as simple as pressing a button. It begins when the internal environment changes, when the underlying biological factors are addressed. When the brain starts receiving the support it needs to function better, and the daily experience starts providing evidence that the trajectory can be different from what the fear suggested. Because the brain is not condemned. That is the truth that modern neuroscience has established with increasing clarity, and that still hasn't reached with enough force the conversations people have about cognitive aging. The adult brain, even the aging brain, even the brain showing signs of decline, retains the capacity to respond positively to adequate stimulation, to create new synaptic connections, to reorganize neural roots, to strengthen circuits that were being underused. This has a name: neuroplasticity, and it has no expiration date. What that means in practice is that the conditions you create for your brain today, the nutrients you provide, the sleep quality you prioritize, the physical movement you incorporate, the level of stress you learn to manage, have real capacity to influence where your brain will be 1, 2, 5 years from now. Not magically, not overnight, but really, progressively, and for those inside the process, surprisingly perceptibly. The real effect comes from the sum: sleeping better, creating the conditions for memory consolidation and nightly glymphatic cleaning to happen completely. Reducing chronic stress, removing the toxicity of persistent cortisol on the hippocampus. Moving the body regularly, stimulating BDNF production, the neurotrophic factor that promotes new neural connections. Eating in a way that reduces systemic inflammation instead of feeding it. Stimulating the brain with genuinely new learning that creates connections that didn't exist before. And yes, small adjustments like adding a clove to coffee can be part of that set. Not as an isolated solution, but as one of the multiple signals you send to the system every day saying, conditions are changing, support is arriving. It's the daily repetition that builds results. Not 1 week of heroic effort followed by abandonment, but 1 clove in coffee today, and tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow. Within a routine that progressively becomes more favorable to brain function on multiple fronts. That's how large changes usually begin. Not with a grand decision, with a small adjustment, made with consistency, to which other adjustments add up, until the whole creates something that no isolated element could create on its own. If you feel like your mind is slow, if you forget frequently, or if you notice that mental clarity isn't what it used to be, know this. You don't have to accept this as your destiny. It isn't inevitable. It isn't irreversible. It isn't the inescapable result of simply having more years of life. It's the result of an environment that isn't providing the brain with what it needs. And environments can be changed. There is a natural, accessible, evidence-based method for recovering focus, memory, and daily confidence. And sometimes, the change begins with something as small as 1 clove in coffee. The complete method is in the pinned comment. And if this content made sense to you, subscribe to the channel. In the upcoming videos, I'll keep showing you natural and effective strategies to strengthen the mind, protect memory, and help your brain work in your favor every single day.